badly, even though the Americans used reduced firepower to limit damage in what was the longest sustained infantry battle of the war so far. The communist occupation had the same psychological effect on South Vietnam as the Saigon embassy siege had in America, intensified by evidence of a Viet Cong atrocity. 3,000 political opponents were buried in a mass grave. Khe Sanh was where General Giap tried to inflict a stunning battlefield defeat on the Americans, like Dien Bien Phu. The Americans established the base to disrupt communist supply lines from Laos, just as the French had tried to do at Dien Bien Phu. It was also a potential jumping-off point for a cross-border offensive against communist supply bases in Laos, something the politicians prevented. When fighting began, it was home to 6,000 American Marines and ARVN Rangers. Against these, Giap brought 3 divisions, 40,000 men backed by tanks and artillery. There is strong evidence that he personally commanded them from caves in the demilitarized zone. Similarities with Dien Bien Phu ended with American firepower and logistics. Unlike Dien Bien Phu, mortar and artillery attacks failed to sever the air supply lifeline. The CH-54 Sky Crane lifted big guns to new fire bases. And the Fairchild providers continued to bring in the vital ammunition and food. Others ran the gauntlet of North Vietnamese attacks from positions just beyond the narrow airfield perimeter, landing their supplies by more direct means. The North Vietnamese siege was blasted by the airstrikes of Operation Niagara. The siege broke as mysteriously as it had begun. Giap had used too many troops to support a mere diversion, and then removed them amid speculation that he feared a tactical American atomic strike if he captured 6,000 Marines. Soon afterwards, the Americans themselves abandoned it too. The communist Great Offensive had failed militarily. Here at My Lai, a search and destroy mission met no guerrillas. Instead, American troops massacred 500 old men, women, and children. Its immediate effect in the United States was to intensify anti-war demonstrations. Within a fortnight, President Johnson had stood down from the impending presidential election. The gains on the battlefield were being reversed by plunging public confidence. That led to falling morale. There had always been the problem that service was limited to 12 months, preventing any build-up of useful combat experience. Drug abuse and indiscipline increased sharply. With growing opposition to the war at home, troop withdrawals began in earnest. Communist forces, decimated by losses during Tet, concentrated on the Mekong River. From now on, the war would be won by the super guerrilla fighting a conventional war once the necessary logistical build-up had taken place. That would take several years while counterinsurgency continued. By 1972, America was concentrating on Vietnamization, putting ARVN back in the front line while they withdrew. The communists tested that with a 3-pronged Easter offensive as peace talks continued. A long convoy of South Vietnamese prepares for the assault to retake An Loc. By now, United States ground forces had been cut to 24,000, compared to 500,000 after Tet. Most were advisors, who effectively led ARVN troops in several desperate battles. Communist firing positions were hammered mercilessly. But Arvin troops did not always fight with enthusiasm. Some simply ran with their families. For the last time, American firepower bailed them out. The new Cobra gunships with triple cannon and rockets broke up many infiltration attempts. The offensive aimed at grabbing territory where communists had historically won support, but disintegrated under carpet bombing by the B-52s. They carried over 100 750-pound bombs, and breaking up division-strength assaults proved the most successful aspect of their war. Once again, Giap had failed to appreciate the strength of a weapon he didn't possess. For a change, air supremacy won the day for the Americans, but it was only temporary. Sky raiders over Gia Loc near Saigon. A misdirected napalm attack by South Vietnam's Air Force. The victims, not communist regulars, but children. Once again, innocent civilians were the victims of the efforts to defend them. The North Vietnamese needed 2 years to regroup after the Americans left. Their final invasion began with well-placed thrusts to divide the country. Further assaults on Hue, Con Tum and Da Nang threw the South Vietnamese into chaos, and the communists swept south to reach Saigon just before May Day 1975. May Day 2 years earlier, North Vietnam displays the SAM-2 missiles and other weapons that will do its work. General Giap's army had come far, with brand new Russian T-54 tanks to spearhead the coming offensive. 30 years earlier, they numbered just a peasant platoon. Now they would prove well-trained in the sky as well as on land. Their morale, ability and leadership would prove to be in sharp contrast to the South Vietnamese, who faced confusing and contradictory orders as they hurried their big guns northwards. Frightened refugees were beginning to signal the disaster to come. Many of these howitzers would never reach their destinations, bogged down in the civilian panic to evade the oncoming fighting. The lucky ones merely were delayed. Further north, hundreds were killed by shelling. The major encounter before Saigon was at Xuan Loc. In an epic artillery battle, one South Vietnamese division stood off 3 from the north for 2 weeks. Panicky attempts to switch troops across rapidly changing fronts caused people to flee in their tens of thousands, blocking reinforcements. Political interference with Arvin deployment exposed all its weaknesses. The final collapse was swift, as soldiers and civilians alike crammed onto any boat going to leave Saigon. The North Vietnamese main force regulars entered the capital on April the 30th, 1975. They had failed to defeat the American soldier on the battlefield. In the final analysis, the tenacity of the North and the corruption of the South sabotaged the huge American military effort. North Vietnam was motivated in a way that the South, even with the United States behind them, failed to match. The lesson was that to win a revolutionary war requires the political will as well as the military might.